This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 106 of Here's How for the 15th of July 2020. In this podcast, I'm looking at a controversy that's not really a controversy, or a controversy about a non-controversy, or, well, listen, decide for yourself.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
First of all, I want to thank all of my donors on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who does that. If you don't know, Patreon is basically a system that allows people to donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, and that helps me to devote more time to research and finding interesting guests. It's an awful lot less than paying €160 a year to RTE for your TV license. So if you think that you could do the same as them, there's details on the website and at the end of this show. Now, last Saturday, there was a demonstration outside the Dáil that was hastily organised to try to capitalise on a controversy that you may or may not have noticed, depending on what corners of Twitter you inhabit, if any. The genesis of this was an article on the website Gript, a clone of far-right American opinion websites run mostly by former youth defence activists and edited by John McGurk, who's been on this podcast. It was about the new Green Party minister, Roderick O'Gorman. His brief is the newly renamed Department of Children, Disability, Equality and Integration. He's basically the Minister for Woke. Gript have made a habit of mining the social media feeds of newly elected left-wing TDs for anything that can be packaged into an embarrassing article. To be fair to them, they exposed pretty unsavoury anti-Semitic comments made by one Sinn Féin TD. They didn't get anything said by Roderick O'Gorman that was worth writing about, but they did find a photo from a gay pride parade in 2018 where he and the British-based gay rights activist Peter Tatchell appeared together. This article then triggered the actor and sometimes travellers' rights activist John Connors to record a rant and put it on Twitter.
This is an issue I'm not going to let go. I think this is very important. This should be the political scandal of the year. And I'm talking about Roderick O'Gorman and the Green Party's association with Peter Tatchell, who's been trying to lower the age of consent in Britain for the past 30 years down to 14, which to me makes him a paedophile activist. And obviously we know about him talking about 8 and 9-year-olds having sex with adults and it being normal and friends of his, so that's a paedophile apologist at least. This is disgraceful. The Green Party invited him over and he marched with the Green Party in Pride. Now instead of addressing this, Roderick O'Gorman has now played the victim card and claimed homophobia. I mean, everybody's afraid to say something about this because they're afraid of being called homophobic. But I think you're homophobic if you're afraid to talk about it, because what's the association between homophobia and paedophilia? I've had a number of gay men in particular getting in touch with me telling me to keep the pressure on this because they don't want any association or don't want pride associated to a paedophile apologist / advocate that is Peter Tatchell. So he still hasn't addressed this, and he's our new Minister for Children and Equality and amongst other things. This should be the political scandal of the year. A lot of people have picked this up on Twitter, a lot of the general public, and people are enraged by this, but the media will not pick it up. They will not pick this up. What is going on? Should be a national scandal. Are we serious here? I mean, and I tell you, like, they're branding people far right for being anti-paedophilia. What is wrong with this? I mean, this should be left, right and centre. Everybody should be involved in this. This is a disgrace, and I see nothing but silence from people, and anybody who's a platform that I've reached out to, silence, and people are telling me to stop, and they're sending me some of my old tweets of controversy. I will stand over every tweet I've ever done. I'll apologise for none of it, and you won't cancel me either, and I don't give a flying This is disgraceful. The same people here as well on the left who talk about the Catholic Church and their abuse, and they won't call it out in this instance, what's going on in this sort of corruption. He needs to resign from his position. People need to get together, and something needs to happen in regarding this. This is getting out.
That ends a bit abruptly there, but that's what John Connors published. It's worth looking into the background of this. Peter Tatchell is pushing 70 at this stage, but he was pushing for gay rights long before it was fashionable. He was a UK Labour parliamentary candidate in 1981 in a previously safe Labour seat, where he was subjected to a barrage of homophobic abuse and as a result lost badly to, ironically, the Liberal candidate Simon Hughes, who at the time was a closeted homosexual. Tatchell stepped down from his activism in 2009 because of the effects of brain damage he suffered, including from being beaten by neo-Nazis when he was taking part in a pride parade in Moscow, and by thugs hired by Robert Mugabe when Tatchell tried to perform a citizen's arrest in Brussels for human rights abuses in Zimbabwe, and Tatchell was beaten unconscious. He's clearly not afraid to stand up for his views, and most of these views have been vindicated by history, but not all. In 1997, The Guardian journalist Ros Coward wrote a withering piece about a book edited by one Joseph Geriachi, calling for what he called a more balanced debate on paedophilia. Ros Coward rightly excoriated the book. Peter Tatchell then wrote a letter to The Guardian saying that while he didn't condone paedophilia, he believed not all sex with children is unwanted, abusive and harmful. He gave the example of the Sambia tribe in Papua New Guinea, where all young boys have sex with older warriors as part of their initiation ritual. Nonsense. Papua New Guinea is one of the most isolated places in the world, densely forested and impossibly mountainous. There are thousands of tribes who live essentially a Stone Age existence, with little or no contact with the outside world. The example, by the way, is very, very well known to anthropologists. So I don't say nonsense that this example isn't true. It is true. I've seen it cited elsewhere, including in a book by Germaine Greer. I say nonsense to any suggestion that it has the slightest relevance to discussions of child abuse in the Western world today, or in the 1990s, or in the 1890s for that matter. This example was brought up for one reason and one reason only. It provided a narrative whereby men who had a sexual interest in young boys could somehow construct an argument that acting on that interest would be something other than child abuse. I don't have any opinion on the rituals of Stone Age tribesmen in Papua New Guinea, any more than Stone Age tribesmen in Papua New Guinea have any interest in this podcast. But that's not what's at issue. What's at issue is any public figure carving out the intellectual space to minimise or explain away child abuse. But that was an issue for a fairly minor British figure at the end of the last century. What relevance does it have to Ireland decades later? Well, John Connors tried to make a link. He said that this was the Irish political scandal of the year, but he didn't really explain why, so I got in touch with him. I thought that it was particularly relevant because he had said in other tweets that he thought the media were ignoring the story. He sent me a message back via WhatsApp.
Man, yesterday was mad. Yeah, listen, I'll do that podcast, no problem, yeah? What format?
We exchanged a few more messages and agreed a time the next day to record, but John never answered the phone. And he's ignored my messages and calls since then. It seems that he's blocked me on WhatsApp. The first question that I would have asked John would have been, did he believe in guilt by association? Does being photographed beside a dodgy person make you responsible for their offences? Because if it does, then John has a few questions to answer himself. In particular, because he previously published a photograph of himself with Mike Tyson. Connors is giving Tyson a big thumbs up, and the caption says that he's chilling with his mate Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is a registered sex offender.
We start with the heavy hitter right away. Former heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson with some trouble on his hands.
Right. Mike Tyson charged today with rape, criminal deviant conduct, and confinement resulting from a complaint filed by an 18-year-old beauty contestant who claims the former heavyweight champion raped her on the night of July 19th in Indianapolis.
Tyson was convicted of raping a teenage girl in 1992. Bear in mind that Tyson was a heavyweight boxing champion weighing 100 kilos, almost 16 stone, and incredibly muscular. His victim was less than half his weight. Since that conviction, Tyson is on the Florida Sex Offenders Register. I found his entry on the register within a few seconds on Google. It's clear to me that Tyson's crimes are far more serious than anything Tatchell has done, and Tyson's connection with Connors is far closer than any connection O'Gorman has with Tatchell. But that didn't seem to bother Connors. He claimed this, remember.
This is disgraceful. The Green Party invited him over and he marched with the Green Party in Pride.
I asked Connors where he got this information that the Green Party had invited Peter Tatchell to Pride in Dublin, which seems strange since it's hardly their business to invite or not invite anyone to a Pride parade. I asked him did he have a copy of the invitation. He hasn't answered. He did, however, say this on his Twitter feed.
Now, instead of addressing this, Roderick O'Gorman has now played the victim card and claimed homophobia.
He claimed homophobia. The thing is that you just have to look at the responses to Connor's tweet to see a whole raft of homophobia. The picture of the kiss that O'Gorman got from his partner when he was declared elected in February was posted and reposted clearly pejoratively. It didn't take much searching online for photos of Peter Tatchell with members of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin to emerge. That didn't seem to arouse any interest from the many accounts that were furiously retweeting the story. It was noticeable that a lot of those accounts had no or fake profile photos, had strange numeric handles, had a tiny number of followers and very recent creation dates, all indications that these are automated bots, not real accounts. But the striking claim was that the minister, and I'm not kidding here, the claim was that the minister enjoys sharing satanic images of children being eaten. This takes a little bit of unpacking. During the lockdown, people with too much time on their hands started a meme of mocking up famous paintings and sharing them as photos. Medics in full PPE created the Last Supper image by Da Vinci. Someone put a waste paper basket on their head to get the look of a Flemish merchant in an Old Master by Van Eyck. And there's this painting by a Spanish painter called Saturn Devouring His Son. The painter, Francisco Goya, died in 1828, and this picture is inspired by another painting by Rubens, who died in 1640. It's a scene from Greek mythology where the god Saturn ate his son. It's gory, but in no way realistic. The myth it's based on isn't that different from the biblical story of Abraham sacrificing his son. The painting is currently in the Museo del Prado in Madrid, the Spanish equivalent of the National Gallery. In the shop there you can buy prints, postcards, notebooks and even bookmarks with the image. And hopping on this trend, the Dublin comedian Hannah Malice recreated the scene with a doll and some tomato sauce and tweeted the image of both. Roderick O'Gorman, it seems, retweeted it. On this basis, there was a storm of tweets claiming that the minister was into cannibalism, Satanism and child murder, which I think is an overreaction. And it's not too much of a stretch to attribute that overreaction to homophobia, particularly when it's interspersed with clearly homophobic language. And hopping on this trend, the iRegsit Party quickly organised a demonstration last Saturday outside the Dáil with the slogan, "Hands off our kids." They obviously had a better luck than me getting a call back from John Connors, because within hours they were furiously tweeting and retweeting a graphic promoting the rally with a big picture of Connors, billing him as an independent speaker. iRegsit, you might remember, is the party set up to promote the idea of Ireland following in the Brexit footsteps of Britain out of the EU. They got less than 0.25% of the votes in the election in February. The main mover in the party is a guy called Herman Kelly. He once worked as a journalist with the Irish Catholic newspaper. He claims that he was the editor, but the Irish Catholic deny this. After that, he went to work in the EU for the European Freedom and Direct Democracy group of parties in the European Parliament. One of those parties was the Sweden Democrats, a party founded in the 1980s by Swedish neo-Nazis, including at least one who left Sweden during the war to join the SS, the Nazi unit responsible for running concentration camps such as Auschwitz. Also at the rally were activists from the National Party and Justin Barrett, who has well-documented links with neo-fascist groups on the continent. The National Party, by the way, also got less than 0.25% of the votes in February. At the rally, many of their activists carried posters showing images of a noose. Also at the rally were people wearing the Trump-style Make America Great Again hat, carrying a banner saying No to RSE, the sex education programme, and few, if any of them, were wearing masks. They heard Herman Kelly railing against the press for not covering the event.
What about the Irish media? What are they? Prostitutes! Prostitutes! The Irish whore media! They're not here!
Kelly repeated a number of inaccurate claims about the new government's policy, and as well as posing for a photo with Kelly, John Connors spoke as well.
I said to Roderick O'Gorman, take back your statement, disavow your connection, and we'll accept that. Okay? But what happened? 5 or 6 days of pressure from the Irish people, from all of you, finally made him disavow his connection. And what did he say? He probably wouldn't have taken the picture. Probably. Well, I know I'd never take a picture with a paedophile apologist. But not only that, then other tweets started surfacing, some very questionable tweets, and we know that he's had a past relationship. So then you say, what's his agenda?
Connors wasn't able to reference any complaint that he had about anything the minister had actually said or done, and the questionable tweets that he mentions there seems to be a reference to the meme with the Goya painting that he retweeted. But John Connors said he would never take a picture with a paedophile apologist. But what about him taking a picture with a mate of his, a registered sex offender? Later, on Twitter, he seemed to respond to people making that point.
And they're sending me some of my old tweets of controversy. I will stand over every tweet I've ever done. I'll apologise for none of it, and you won't cancel me either, and I don't give a flying This is the
What's to make of all this? I don't think that John Connors is a particularly hate-filled person, despite the rhetoric and the kind of people he's hanging out with. I do think that he's a fool and an egotist, and that's not just my opinion. I spoke to a very senior source involved in promoting travellers' rights who emphasised that they thought Connors had done great work as a role model and advocate for travellers, but were deeply disappointed with his involvement with far-right figures. The source was certain that Connors would be taken to task by travellers' rights advocates behind the scenes. They've made common cause with the Roma community on the continent, the Gypsies, and are acutely aware of how Roma were murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust. I would have liked to ask John Connors what he thought would become of travellers if the people he was speaking with and their fascist friends ever came to power in Ireland. But as I say, for all his big talk, he hasn't had the guts to pick up my calls. But I want to finish on this one note. How do we know what the purpose of people like Herman Kelly and Justin Barrett is in all this? I want to listen here to what Nick Griffin, the former leader of the British National Party, had to say on this topic. He managed to get his party, briefly, out of the fringe and get councillors and even 2 MEPs elected in Britain. This is a recording of him talking to a group of neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klansmen in the United States. He talks about his party had railed against Jews and immigrants from the fringes, and that he had changed tactics to avoid putting off potential new supporters.
And the British National Party isn't about selling out its ideas, which are your ideas too, but we are determined now to sell them. And that means basically to use these saleable words, as I say, freedom, security, identity, democracy. Perhaps one day Once, by being rather more subtle, we've got ourselves in a position where we control the British broadcasting media, then perhaps one day the British people might change their mind and say, yes, every last one must go. Perhaps they will one day. But if you hold it out as your sole aim to start with, you're going to get absolutely nowhere.
Kelly and Barrett certainly don't have much of a history in advocating child protection. Have they had a sudden conversion to this cause? Or do they see it as an opportunity for something else?
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show. I've put all the images and screenshots of the Twitter stuff that I was talking about for you to see on there. I contacted Herman Kelly, who refused to cooperate with the podcast, and Justin Barrett, who didn't respond. So much for their complaint that the media won't cover them. But John, Herman, Justin, if any of you can work up the courage, get in touch and we'll see if you can explain yourselves. Anyway, while you're on the website, you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and get in touch with me if you can suggest a topic or a guest for a future show who will actually pick up the call. And thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon. Their donations allow me to devote more time to researching and finding interesting guests. And if you could do the same as them and donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, go to patreon.com/here'show. That link is on the website, and there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free as well, on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.